Hello and welcome back to Russ's Movie Corner. My name is Russ, and as you can see, I am sitting in front of my movie corner. I have my Bible the Epic miniseries right here, and as you can see from the video around me, we are taking on SciManDan yet again. For this one, he's coming out against Kent Hovind once more, but he's not specifically attacking Kent at first. He's going to be attacking Kent a little bit later in the video, okay? So we'll do his little intro, and then he usually does his little intro, and then he skips forward to do a sponsor. Then after that, he goes to the next part. So this is going to be a rebuttal of this video called "You Don't Want to Visit this Creationist Science Center."
Dinosaur Adventureland is the place that Kent Hovind calls home. It has forever been the place of what he calls science communication and regularly gives tours around it. Tours which include the Science Centre, a science centre which has its own tour guide. A tour guide who's been giving science lessons on Kent's channel. Yep, you all know what this means, don't you? Roll the intro.
Alright, so that was his intro, and basically, so what he's talking about is that, so Kent Hovind has down in Lenox, Alabama, and he had one in Florida before he went to jail, but it's called Dinosaur Adventureland. And what it is if you've ever been to California, or if you've seen the movie The Wizard, when they go to that sort of a dinosaur like park where you can climb up inside the dinosaurs and you can do certain things. So basically, what's been going on is that Kent has a place called Dinosaur Adventureland, and what it is he's going after the fact that dinosaurs always lived with man, not millions of years ago. They didn't evolve into birds. They were their own separate, classification. And the Bible calls them dragons, okay? And we hear tales of people going out and slaying dragons and stuff like that. And he was saying, who would want to be living next to a Tyrannosaurus Rex, right? Like, they would have called them dragons. And they actually have pots from, like, ancient Greece and from, like, Mesopotamia, where they actually have dinosaurs, or at least they look like dinosaurs on the pots. And, it shows people stabbing them with spears. I mean, it's like, that's, kind of what they did back then. So, that's kind of Ken's position on it. I tend to take the same view because I am a Christian. And that's because these guys don't have any real evidence. And we're going to go over that today. Plus, people like SciManDan tend to gloss over parts of their theory because they don't know their theory. Okay? So we're going to talk about that a little bit too. So, let's jump back in here.
Video, which, as I stated at the start, we're taking a look at the Science Centre at Kent Hovind's Dinosaur Adventureland. We start with a video from the Science Centre tour guide Damien, who's going to talk to us all about how dinosaurs used to live with humans.
Welcome to Dinosaur Adventureland. This is the Science Center, day 6, where we go over the dinosaurs. So we've got some interesting things here.
So when he says Science Center day 6, this is the 6th day of creation. So in the creation story, okay, when we look at Genesis and we look at the 6 days of creation, okay, let me see here. It says chapter 1, verse 24. Then God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures after their kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth after their kind, and it was so. God made the beasts of the earth after their kind, the cattle after their kind, and everything that creeps on the ground after its kind, and God saw that it was good. Then God said, let us make man in our image, according to our likeness, and let them rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created them, male and female he created them. God blessed them, and God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. And then God said, behold, I have given to you every plant yielding seed that is on the earth, that is on the surface of all the earth, and every tree which has fruit yielding seed, it shall be food for you. And to every beast of the earth, and to every bird of the sky, and to every thing that moves on the earth which has life, I have given every green plant for food. And it was so. And God saw that he had made, and behold, it was very good. And there was evening, and there was morning, the sixth day. And then in 2:1 and 2:2 it says, thus the heavens and the earth were completed, and all their hosts. By the seventh day God had completed his work which he had done, and he rested on the seventh day from all his work in which he had done. So basically what he's saying here is that in the Science Center they have a part labeled day 1, right? God created the heavens and the earth. In the beginning God created the heavens and the earth, and he saw these formless and shapeless living above the earth. And then they have a day 2, and then they have a day 3, and then they have a day 4, and then they have a day 5, and then they have a day 6. And this part right here is day 6, where they're talking about how dinosaurs and lizards and everything kind of live together. Okay? So
here's a picture of fossilized dinosaur skin. You'll notice the circles in the skin of the dinosaurs. These are ichthyostones from Peru, over 1,000 years old. They depict dinosaurs on the stones, and you can actually see the circles in the skin of those dinosaurs. Interesting.
Ah, the ichthyostones. Ancient stones discovered by a farmer who went on to admit that he actually carved some of them himself.
So, did he base his designs on stones he found, or did he admit to carving all of them? Because if he admitted to carving some of them, then the ones that weren't carved by him must have been different.
This one isn't going to fly, Damien. Moving on.
How did they know about dinosaurs 1,000 years ago? We only started piecing the bones together in the 1800s. How did they know? How did they know specifically what the skin looked like?
I just said, matey, because a farmer faked them.
Yeah, but how did the farmer know what the stones... Because, again, you said he admitted to carving some of them himself. Was it some of them or all of them? Because you can't say some of them in one breath and then turn around and go, oh, he faked them all. That doesn't fly, dude. Either he faked them all, or he carved some of them himself, but some of them are legitimate. Some of them were actually carved, and he found some, and to make it seem like it was more of a treasure trove, he carved a few himself, and then, you know, said, hey, I discovered all these stones, look at all these things. And then later on, people were like, oh, well, this one looks like it was recently carved. Oh, yeah, sorry, that was me. But were all of them or some of them? You can't have it both ways, dude. You can't say he admitted to carving some of them and then turn right around in the same breath and say, well, he faked them. No, he faked some of them. You said he faked some of them. So which is it? Make up your mind. You can't have it both ways. Okay? I mean, this is like when people say, well, you know, I mean, there were the churches, you know, back when the church was first there, you know, they had all these different books that were being, you know, thrown around as scripture. Yeah, hence the reason for the Council of Nicaea. Okay? And just because some of them weren't chosen doesn't mean that the ones that were chosen, you know, were like special in some way. Okay? It's because they had it a certain, you know, they had scholars that looked at it. Okay? And that's where you guys are wrong. You can't say the whole entire Bible is fake because some people somewhere sometime chose some things. No, these were scholars of their day. Okay? And they were the ones that chose. Over the course of like 3 or 4 sessions, over the course of like 10 years, they gathered as much evidence as they possibly could, and they went out and they talked with churches, they talked with other people, they did their homework, and they figured out which ones to include in the New Testament. Just the New Testament. The Old Testament was already decided because they basically took the Hebrew Torah and they said, yeah, they took the Torah, they took the Nevi'im, and they took the Ketuvim, okay? The Tanakh, that's the Law and the Prophets, the history books, and the prophets, okay? So they literally took the law, they took the history books, and then the prose and the prophets books, and they put them all in there, and they were like, this is the Jewish Bible, we're going to use this for this. And you guys do this with the Bible, and now you're doing it with these stones. So you can't have it both ways. You can't on the one hand say, oh, he faked some of the stones, and then turn around and go, well, a farmer faked them. No, he faked a few of the stones. Okay? The ones that haven't been faked, the ones that have been proven by scientists to be legitimate, that were not carved by this farmer, okay? Because when they interviewed him and he said, yeah, I faked some of these stones, here's the ones I faked. They took the ones that he didn't fake, okay? Because he found them, okay? And they took those, and those are the ones that people use, okay? And you guys do this all the time. Oh, well, that story was debunked. No, it wasn't. No, it wasn't. That's the thing. And how would this guy have known what fossilized dinosaur skin looked like? This farmer in Peru, how would he have known what fossilized dinosaur skin looked like? Answer me that, and then we'll continue.
We can compare that skin to other reptiles here. We can see the circles in their skin. You got the Draco flying lizards. Reptiles never stop growing throughout their lifetimes. On day 2, we go over Dr. Hovind's canopy theory. If there was an ice canopy that encapsulated the world when God originally created it, it's likely that we had more oxygen and more air pressure.
Ah, the ice canopy theory. Kent Hovind believes that when God first created the Earth, he did so with an enormous big canopy of ice covering the entire planet.
We actually find the proof.
Okay, let me address this because people seem to think that this is like a gotcha moment. Atheists seem to think this. Kent Hovind says that there was a 3-finger thick. Take your first 3 fingers, put them together. That's how thick he says the ice was around the Earth. That's not very thick. We're not talking about miles thick of ice here, okay? Or feet, or hundreds of feet, or thousands of feet, or miles, or anything like that. Okay? Because the reason why he proposes this is, again, in the biblical account. Okay? There's 2 different places where he cites this. Number 1, okay? Because like he said, on day 2, okay? Well, on day 1. But let me just read from verse 4 here. It says, God saw that the light was good, and God separated the light from the darkness. God called the light day, and the darkness night. And there was evening and there was morning, one day. Okay, so that's the first day. So verse 6, then God said, let there be an expanse in the midst of the waters, and let it separate waters from the waters. God made the expanse, separated the waters which were below the expanse from the waters which were above the expanse, and it was so. God called the expanse heaven, and there was evening and there was morning the second day. Okay? So what he's saying is that in this portion, he's saying there was the waters below, and there was the waters above, and let's make an expanse that we separate that from. Okay? And he believes that that is the ice canopy that was around the earth. And he believes that it was 3 fingers thick. And I had a guy talk about this, and I think I talked about this on one of my comments on comments episodes, where this one guy was like, you know, how would you know, the sun beating down on that, and you know, how would that stay? And I'm like, space is cold, dude. I'm like, how cold is space again? Like negative 200 degrees. Okay, like it's really freaking cold in space. Okay, and that would keep the ice cold. Okay, and it would keep it, and basically it would create a greenhouse. The other way that we know about this also is that when we look at the people in the Bible, okay, Adam, it says, lived to be, let me see here. Yeah, it says, when Adam had lived 130 years, he became the father of a son in his own likeness, according to his image, named him Seth. This is 5, verse 3. And then in the days of Adam, after he became the father of Seth, were 800 years, and he had other sons and daughters. And so all the days that Adam lived were 930 years, and he died. And that's before the flood. So we see that these people were living to be 900 years old, okay? And so as they're living to be 900 years old, they're kind of looking at it and they're going, oh my goodness, like we have this huge, you know, like we're doing this thing. And then when the flood happens in verse 7, because verse 6 is just the Lord kind of going, oh my God, mankind's horrible, I need to get rid of them. But Noah found righteousness. And so then, when Noah enters the ark, okay, here's where the part about the canopy comes in, because it says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, on the 17th day of the month, on the same day the fountains of the great deep burst open, and the floodgates of the sky were opened, and rain fell upon the earth for 40 days and 40 nights. On the very same day, Noah, Shem, Ham, Japheth, sons of Noah, and Noah's wives, and 3 wives of his sons, with them entered the ark, and they, every beast after their kind, every cattle, blah, blah, blah. And then it says, and then the flood came upon the earth for 40 days, and the water increased and lifted up the ark so it rose above the earth. The water prevailed and increased greatly upon the earth, and the ark floated upon the surface of the water. The water prevailed more and more upon the earth, so that all the high mountains everywhere were under the heavens were covered. The water prevailed 15 cubits higher, and the mountains were covered. And then it says, all flesh perished. Where it says, the fountains of the deep broke open, and then the floodgates of heaven were opened. He's saying that there's a few geologists out there that believe that there was something called the hydroplate theory, that there was actual water below the earth, okay, below the crust of the earth. And at some point, that water burst forth, okay? And some people foolishly ask all the time, some of the atheists, well, where's all that water now? In the oceans. Literally, in the oceans, dude. That's where it is, okay? This would have radically changed the face of the earth, okay? This amount of tectonic shift of all of this water emptying, okay, would have created a massive shift in the earth's crust, okay? And we know that geology has rapidity to it, okay? Yes, plates are moving slow now, but they weren't moving slow at that time because they would have been settling and shifting and moving because of that flood, okay? And so what Kent Hovind believes is when the water burst forth from the ground, and that's about the only thing that Darren Aronofsky really did right in terms of Noah, this idiotic movie, was that he actually shows the water bursting forth from the ground. That's about the only thing that I can say that's approximately correct about all of that. And then it actually shows it, and what Ken Hovind believes is that the water burst forth and it went up and it actually crashed through that ice shield. And then what would have happened is that that ice would have started, some of it would have fallen into Earth, some of it would have actually been propelled out into space. Okay? And Kent Hovind reasons, and this is his theory, not mine, I'm just saying that it sounds logical to me, is that that's why we see certain craters on our face of the moon. There's craters on the backside of the moon, but meteors coming at us, okay, are not going to go around us and then hit the moon. Meteors that are coming at us would be drawn to us, okay? Just like when they had like the comet Shoemaker-Levy 9, it bypassed all the moons of Jupiter and went straight in and hit the planet itself because of the gravitational pull of the planet. So when we see that, it's like he's reasoning that that's why we see craters on this side of the moon that faces us, because our moon is tidally locked. That means that one face of it is always facing us. That's the face that we see whenever we look at the moon, okay? Is we look at that face and we go, there it is, okay? So that's what he's saying, okay? Now, the other thing is that when he talks about the descendants of Noah, let me see here. When he talks about when the people I'm trying to remember. When I get it, I'll put it down, and I'll also mention it. But basically, the people use the same language, and then the Tower of Babel happens. But like, okay, so in 11 verse 10 says, "These are the records of the generations of Shem. Shem was 100 years old, and then became the father of Arpachshad 2 years after the flood. And Shem lived 500 years after he became the father of Arpachshad, and he had other sons and daughters. Arpachshad lived 35 years and became the father of Shelah. And Arpachshad lived 403 years after he became the father of Shelah, and he had other sons and daughters. Shelah lived 30 years and became the father of Eber. And Shelah lived 403 years after he became the father of Eber. Eber lived 34, became the father of Peleg. And Eber lived 430 years after he became the father of Peleg, and he had other sons and daughters. Peleg lived 30 years, became the father of Reu. Peleg lived 209 years. So, do you notice something about these guys? Shem lived 430 years. Arpachshad lived 403. Shelah lives 403. Eber lived 430. Peleg, though, lived 209. And Reu lives 207. And Serug lived 200 years. So they start at 400 years, and then they drop to 200 years within 3 generations. What changed? Pre-flood, people were living 900 years. Post-flood, people started living at 430 years, then drastically within about 3 to 4 generations dropped to 200 years, and a couple generations after that, they're barely living over 100. Okay? Abram lived to be like 105, but then after that, most of the people barely lived to be 100, and from then on, life expectancy dropped. What changed? The atmosphere. the atmosphere, the flood fundamentally changed our atmosphere, because before, and Kent Hovind uses the I can't think right off the hand. He uses the model of the hyperbaric chamber to show what compressed air can do for a person. So, like, if you go into a greenhouse, the air feels close and thick, but when you breathe, you feel like $1,000,000. Okay, if you ever walk into a greenhouse and you breathe in a greenhouse for a little while, you kind of go, "Wow, this is kind of nice." It's because, and the greenhouse isn't sealed like a hyperbaric chamber, but the greenhouse has a higher oxygen content because the plants are taking the CO2 in the air and they're converting it to oxygen, and most of that oxygen is staying inside of the greenhouse itself. Okay, some of it's leaking out because the building's not airtight, and whenever you open the door and stuff like that, but it's kind of that way. Okay, you kind of get this feeling of like, wow, you know, it's like there's more oxygen here. Okay, and that's the point, is that Kent Hovind was saying that the canopy of ice around the Earth that was 3 fingers thick, remember that, okay, that was around the Earth, okay, brings the oxygen content up, okay, and it made the people live longer, okay, and what ends up happening is that Kent Hovind is saying that after the flood, we see that people's life expectancies went from 900 years to 400 years to 200 years within like 3-4 generations, and then down to 100 within 3 to 4 generations after that. So what would have had to have changed to make people's life expectancies drop so dramatically, or drastically, either way you want to say it? What changed? I argued in my previous SciManDan that what has changed? The atmosphere, dude. I mean, if you look at it, like, our atmosphere, okay, the X-rays, there are millions of X-rays that still get through and hit your skin and hit your body, okay, on really sunny days, okay? And that's why, okay? So, and the thing is, if you use the inverse square law, which even evolutionists will say are, you know, no, we know that the Earth can't be more than 10,000, at least the moon can't be more than 10,000 years old, because if they use the inverse square law, it basically makes the moon like crash into the Earth around about 10 to 11,000 years ago. So it can't be more than that. Okay? So Kent Hovind is reasoning that when God put the moon in the sky, it slowly was moving away from us, and so it would, when the flood happened, it would have been closer than it was now, and it would have created much higher tides that would have created these tidal basins that were filled in by the water that we now call the oceans. Okay? And so that's Kent Hovind's reasoning behind his Hovind theory, okay? That's the Hovind theory, all right? So just so we know, that's the Hovind theory. Let's keep going.
Of this in fossilized amber with the air bubbles that have 32% oxygen in them. We're only breathing in 21%, so that's 50% more oxygen.
Well, yes, there was more oxygen in prehistoric times than there is today.
So then what happened? How was that oxygen being contained? See, here's the one thing that the evolutionist and the atheist cannot answer, is why was there a higher concentration of oxygen back then? Okay? Some people will tell you, oh, because it was a lush, fertile land. You don't know that. Okay? What you know is that there is oil, there is fossils, and there is coal in the ground. That's all you know. You don't know how it got there. You don't know where it came from. And it's funny to me that over Dan's left shoulder is the Arabian Peninsula, which is a frickin' desert. And yet, when you ask these people, how is it that that peninsula, okay, which is supposedly the cradle of human civilization, okay, and it's even mentioned in the frickin' book of Genesis as being the site of the Garden of Eden, how is it that they have so much oil beneath the ground? I know. The flood. They can't answer that. Okay? They'll try to say, oh, well, you know, I mean, back when the continents were a lot closer and you know, like billions of years ago, you know, before. No. Because if it's a desert now, okay, and we get deserts around the equator, because we see that down in South America, we see that in Africa, we see that in India, okay, we see that, you know, I mean, you know, we know that desert biomes are usually right where the sun tends to just blast down. You can't have had that kind of stuff. And there was still some plant matter after the flood. But by the time of Abram, who became Abraham, the father of the thing, by the time he moved into what is now modern day Israel, there was not a lot of vegetation around. Okay? There is some, but there's not a lot. Okay? And so people, they can't answer some of these basic questions. Okay? How was there 32% oxygen trapped in prehistoric times if there was no vessel to contain it? It's so funny to me that he can sit there and talk about flat Earth versus globe Earth, and he can mention all of these formulas and he can mention all of these different things, but when it comes to this, they're so utterly clueless. Okay? They cannot tell you what was there. I'm telling you what Ken Hovind says was there, and I'm saying that it looks like it's likely that it was that. Okay? Just because no other logical explanation for it. Because you guys can't point to one thing and say, well, there was way more plants, and it doesn't matter. Okay? If that was the case, then, I mean, you look at how much vegetation is on the earth still today, okay, and if the sun was completely blasting the middle of Africa, which is right behind his head, and right over his shoulder in the Arabian Peninsula, and up through to Afghanistan and Pakistan and all of those places that are basically rocky deserts with not a lot of vegetation, if the sun is blasting those places, how was there so much oxygen? There would have had to have been something containing, because the atmosphere has, we know it has layers now, but how would those layers have been thicker earlier? Was there more gravity from the Earth? It doesn't seem likely, because there's no indication that our planet has lost any mass, or any has, you know, since recorded time, has lost any gravitational pull. It seems like we have the same gravity that we've always had, because it's called the gravitational constant. Okay? That's the reason why we call it the gravitational constant. Okay? We know it because we can measure it depending on what we're doing. Okay, depending on what planet we're orbiting, with what probe or whatever, we can always measure the gravity, and it's a constant. That's why we call it the gravitational constant. Okay? So, it doesn't seem like it's likely, because that would defy the laws of physics. So what was creating that pressure? to hold in the oxygen at 32% versus 21%. And then what happened to it to make it release and go down to 21%? Answer me those two questions.
And there are a variety of reasons for that, of course. But it would be interesting to see how Damien makes allowances for that.
So if the reptiles had 50% more oxygen under greater air pressure, they would be growing much, much bigger. They would live a lot longer.
Well,
Yes, they would.
this was around 350 million years ago. The large...
No, it wasn't. According to your interpretation of the geologic column and some potassium argon dating, where you've taken samples from certain layers and you've dated them, and then you threw out the things because your layering system told you that it was at 350 million years ago. That's why you're saying it's at 350 million years. You don't know that for sure, SciManDan. You don't.
dinosaur that ever lived, the Titanosaur, did so between 145 and 66 million years.
Again, you don't know that. Because you're guessing, because you look at layers in the dirt. You're looking at these layers and you're going, this one's 10,000 years ago, this one's 100,000 years ago, this one's 100 million years ago, and this one's 300 million years ago. That's not how it works, dude. Okay? All you're seeing is layers in the dirt. Charles Lyell was the man who went and said, I hate the Bible, so you know what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that this was, 10,000 years ago, this was 20,000 years ago, this was 30,000 years ago, this was 50,000 years ago. And then it became hundreds of thousands, and then it became millions, and then it became billions. Because they couldn't answer the fundamental questions of why are there certain layers but there's no erosion marks. So they just kept throwing time at it and hoping and praying, crossing their fingers that it was going to work. And it hasn't. Okay? Because all you know about the fossils in the things is that they died. Okay? I mean, here's the thing. If I were to dig up, okay, if I were to dig up a pen out of the dirt, okay, and I went and tested that pen and did all this stuff on it, and I said, wow, this pen looks like it was 10,000 years old. This pen is 10,000 years old. And, because it was found in this rock layer, so it's 10,000 years old. And I did some tests, and tests came back, and they said that it was 10,000 years old. But what happened if some person was digging and happened to drop the pen in the dirt 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 50 years ago, 100 years ago? Okay? You can't prove. I mean, it would be like somebody going to Gettysburg and like digging around and digging up a bullet and going, wow, this bullet was in this layer, because like they fired it at a hillside and they're digging around and they find this bullet and they're like, wow, this bullet was in this rock layer that we know is 10,000 years old. Man, they had gunpowder 10,000 years ago? No, they didn't, dude. That was fired during the battle of the Civil War, at the Battle of Gettysburg. But the problem is, you're not seeing it for what it is. Like Ken Hovind says, go get yourself a jar, okay, with a lid, like a mason jar, okay, get some dirt, okay, kind of mix it up a little bit, throw it in there, leave a little bit of space, put some water in it, put the lid on it, nice and tight, and then shake it up and set it down and come back in like 10-20 minutes. You'll find that it has sorted itself into layers. Now, does that make the layer on top 5,000 years old? Does that make the layer on the bottom 1,000,000 years old? No. It just makes layers in minutes. Which is what a year-long flood would have done. Okay? it would have sorted things depending on size, okay? And some things would have become trapped in mud and various things, okay? The other part of it is that Kent Hovind thinks that after that canopy was shattered, okay, and after the floodwaters started to recede, okay, the atmosphere would have cooled down immensely. And a lot of that ice would have been drawn to the northern latitudes, because it would have melted at the equator, would have been drawn towards the northern latitudes, and it would have created an ice age, okay? And the expanding people, the people moving away from this place, and it would have taken a long time, but the people moving away from this place would have crossed those, crossed those places that would have been accessible. A lot of people were thinking, oh, well, how did Noah go down to Australia and grab the wallabies and the kangaroos? He didn't have to. They were already, every animal was already around. God also brought them all to Noah. Noah didn't go out and get them all. This isn't that Nintendo game from Wisdom Tree where you have to go and pick up each animal over your head like a cow and like run it to the ark, okay? You don't have to do that. He didn't have to do that, okay? It says in the Bible that God brought the animals to them and then would have, put them in and, would have, thrown them, would have put them in the ark, okay? And they would have been using juveniles. So, and people were like, well, then how did the Aborigines get down there? And how did all these people, get to all these Polynesian islands? It's pretty simple. If you were to lower the water level of the oceans by about 200 to 300 feet, you would have land from basically Vietnam, kind of that peninsula, okay, Vietnam, Indonesia, okay, right there, Philippines, all the way down to Australia would be above water if you were to lower it by about 200 to 300 feet, because it's not that deep right there, okay, because of the uplift. There's a little bit of an uplift right there that created that sort of a sandy bar, okay. So yeah, it's not like those people wouldn't have just, they would have, because they would have been following those herds, and it's not like they wouldn't have just walked right out off on that thing. And some of the animals that couldn't adapt would have died along the way. Okay? That's why you get certain animals in certain places, because that's where they adapted. That's where they survived. Adaptation is a thing. We're not saying it's not. And stop saying that we don't believe in that, because we do. All right. Let me do one more little thing here, and then we're getting to about 45 minutes. And so let me do this one last thing, and then we'll call this one an episode, and then we'll come back and we'll kind of do the next episode, and hopefully I'll be able to get through it, because it's not that long. It's only a 7-minute video.
Years ago. Now, at that point in time, the oxygen levels in the atmosphere were far lower than the 35% that you've just claimed.
Here we've got...
Okay, one little note about that. He says, well, about 35 million years ago, the oxygen levels were lower than what you claim. Okay, then, why is that? And how do you know that it's 35 million years ago? Oh, that's right, because you looked at the layer and you went, oh, this one's 35 million years. That's it. That's all they do. Literally, that's all they do. My point is this, okay? When these evolutionists try to spin things, okay, it gets me frustrated, because they like dig down in Antarctica and they pull up these ice cores, and they look at these ice cores and they go, oh, see, there's all these little layers in the ice core, and we know that this layer was 150 million years ago, and this layer was 10,000 years ago, and this layer was this many years ago. No, you don't. You're literally, what they do is, okay, is they drill in another section of the earth, okay, and then they pull out all these layers of dirt, and they take them, they take those layers of dirt, and they set it next to the column of the core of the ice core that they just drilled. And then they go, let's match up the layers. You don't know that those layers are that old. It's not like they come with little tags on them saying, I'm 65 million years old. It doesn't. That's the problem. You don't know. And it's likely that the oxygen content being that low at that time was because it was right after the flood, after that canopy had released, and it took a while because that oxygen would have gone up, okay, would have swelled away, okay, due to escaping gas, and then it would have taken a while for gravity to bring it back down. That's likely why in certain ice cores, in certain amber that they find in certain things that have trapped air in them, they go, wow, there's lower oxygen content here, but there's higher concentrations of carbon dioxide. There's probably because right after the flood, because that canopy was gone, oxygen was escaping, and there were no plants left to breathe in the CO2. Okay? But it would have been enough for the people on the ark to be able to breathe and live. Okay? And people were always asking me, well, how did the trees survive? How did the fungus survive? Seeds. Duh. Alright, well, let's go ahead and call this one an episode. So, thank you for watching. I know this one's kind of a little strange, and I know I'm only 4 minutes in, and I'm like 40 minutes past. But I felt like I needed to explain a few things, because again, these people don't know their theory, and I'm explaining what Dr. Hovind believes. And because I've actually studied geology, which I'm pretty sure SciManDan hasn't, and I'm pretty sure that Professor Dave hasn't studied geology, because I've heard him talk about it, and he doesn't really know that much. I've actually studied geology in the field. I've actually studied it in the lab. I've actually studied it in the classroom. So I'm not going to claim that I'm the world's foremost expert on it, but when compared to these guys, I probably know a lot more about the geologic process than they do, okay, and the different terms and the different things that happen. And when I look at what I learned in geology, and I look at what these guys are trying to propose, it doesn't make any sense. So I just want to say, you know, that again, if you're watching this for apologetics, go ahead and use me, share my videos, you know, do all that kind of stuff. And while you're here, smash that like button, hit subscribe, drop a comment below, let me know what you think of this series so far, and just, you know, kind of, you know, let me know what you think about it, because for me, I just can't see any other reason of why something like this wouldn't be, you know, possible. And, you know, and then it's like when he, you know, when SciManDan here rips on Kent Hovind's Science Center, he's doing it from a place of ignorance, because he really, really, really doesn't know his own theory, and we're going to get into that next time. So, once again, thank you for watching, and as we say, we will see you on the next one.